And welcome back in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. George, the last time we spoke Sunday afternoon, just as the games were getting set to kick off here, we had our eyes on which teams could help out the Colts here on a big Sunday. The Browns, or I guess really I should say the Bears, did not come through, losing late to the Browns. The Titans and their Oilers throwbacks did not come through against the Texans. In a way, the Cowboys could have just maybe eliminated one more team in this very crowded AFC race by beating the Bills. Did not come through. But maybe, George, one team did come through, and maybe it's the biggest one the Colts needed. Sunday night, Ravens beating the Jaguars. And now all of a sudden, George, we wake up on Monday morning, and it's a three-way tie for first place. Now, the Jaguars still have the tiebreaker over both the Colts and Texans, which is why they're still in first place. But now all of a sudden, 3 games to go, that division, like forget the wild card, that division race is truly, truly wide open here. We talked about it, what, 2 weeks ago? Mm-hmm. I think it was when the Jaguars lost to the Bengals, and we both it's realistic, like it's possible, but not realistic. 2 weeks later, George, where do you kind of fall in that stance of the Colts' chances to win the AFC South?
Still an uphill battle, but it's the latest in the Blue Horseshoe Pod history that the Colts are tied for first. So there's, a little history made here today. But also the way this season's gone, across the league, not just for the Colts or the Jaguars or anybody else. Who knows what's going to happen in these final 3 weeks? The Jaguars do not have the most grueling schedule left. You've got Tampa Bay, who is hot right now, and that might be the most losable game, on paper in this bunch. Then you got Carolina, who I guess is hot too. They get a win in a game with 16 points and 16 fans. And then the next one is Tennessee. And right now you have no clue if Will Levis is going to play. I mean, he's got the high ankle sprain. You don't know what that game's going to look like. So it's not like the schedule that they've had leading up to this point that put them at 8-6, far more difficult than this finishing kick. But at the same time, they're dealing with a ton of pressure. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they respond. We talked about it, I think, at the beginning of the year. How will Jacksonville react when they've got a target on their back? And they were, 8-3? And it looked like they were going to run away with this division, and 3 straight losses. The Cincinnati one's really got a stick in their craw because, Jake Browning has proved to be a very capable quarterback, but you never want to lose a game of that importance. I believe it was at home, yep. In prime time against a backup quarterback. And now, that's the one that's probably their Browns game in terms of, they could go back and change one outcome and it would make such a big difference in their standings right now. So I think that's what's going to be interesting to watch. How do they handle? Can Trevor Lawrence get back on track? He's not been playing very well, during this stretch. Can their defense, become even more dominant? Can they they've been good at like getting after quarterbacks, but that's about it. Like everything else you need to do as a defense, they're kind of struggling at right now. Like, can they clean some of that up? And what's it like having 2 teams chase you? I think that's something that's an interesting component of this too. It's not, normally when we're talking about these late season races, it's one team surge, like last year, Tennessee's falling back to the pack and Jacksonville's surging. But Tennessee knew Jacksonville was the only team with a shot, and obviously came down to the final game of the year, and the Jaguars ended up winning the division. Now you've got the Texans every bit as much alive as Indianapolis. If I'm Jacksonville, it's really hard not to look in the rearview mirror right now. And I don't know how they're going to respond. It's going to be really interesting to see. And I think in a lot of ways, there's less pressure on the Colts and the Texans, not just because they weren't the teams coming into this year expected to win the division, but because they've rallied and they've come this far. It'd be disappointing in both fan bases if they don't walk away with an AFC South title, but it'll be disastrous if it happens in Jacksonville.
Without a doubt. You're 100% right. There is 100% pressure on the Jaguars, the Colts and Texans. No pressure win this division. Like I said, just because of their preseason expectations, where the Colts are just quarterback-wise and health-wise. Like there was never any realistic thought, even if you were the most homer fan and optimistic fan. And I like to think I'm in that, that far tier of optimism where it's almost borderline delusional. That's where I fall and live. And still, you went to this year saying wins don't matter, George, right? And expectations, just let's see how Anthony Richardson looks. Nothing else matters. And so there were no expectations. There was no pressure to win any sort of big games, but all the pressures on Jacksonville were a lot of people, including myself. I thought we'd be talking about the Jaguars at this time of the year as like a real Super Bowl contender, and Trevor Lawrence as an MVP candidate based on how he finished last year. Now you're looking, you're right. They are just cratering right now. I would say the division comes down to Sunday. I think to me, the division will be won on Sunday because, like you said, the Jaguars don't have a challenging schedule. The hardest game they have left is going to be this Sunday at the Buccaneers at Baker Mayfield, coming off of the best game maybe of his career, only road quarterback in history to have a perfect passer rating at Lambeau Field. Not bad. Not bad whatsoever. If the Bucs,
the stadium's been around a minute too.
That's true. A lot of different quarterbacks have had opportunities in there, including a former Bucs quarterback who's won a few Super Bowls that could not put up the type of performance that Baker did on Sunday. But right, the Colts need the Jaguars to lose one game, obviously. And if you look at the 3 games left for Tennessee, for Jacksonville, at Tampa, home against the Panthers, at the Titans. So Sunday's the most winnable. So if you're the Colts here, this, to me, I think the division will be won or lost on Sunday. If you can have the Bucs pull off the upset and take down the Jaguars, and obviously the Colts have to take care of their own business as well by beating the Falcons. I think if they go to Atlanta and win, and you see Tampa at home take care of business, I think the Colts will win the division. But if the Colts lose, obviously I think they're done. If Jacksonville just wins, even if the Colts win, I think the division's wrapped up. It's going to go to Jacksonville. So I think because the schedule's the way they laid out, I think it's going to be a 2-team race because also, too, you look at the Texans, they have the Browns this week, and then they obviously finish with the Colts and Indy. Tough game for them to win. They got easily the hardest schedule of the 3 teams remaining there to go undefeated. And if you're the Colts and Texans, if you want to win the division, you have to bank on going 3-0. You can't expect to go 2-1 and think the Jaguars are going to go 1-2 with that 3-game schedule they have. So you got to go undefeated here down the stretch. I think if you're the Colts, the best chance you have, or the only chance really you have, barring a true miracle. So if Panthers win next week, that's it. Like I said, they have a 1-game winning streak. People say, oh, you need to have 2 games at least to have a winning streak. We'll give the Panthers a 1-game winning streak. They're hot right now. Still, I don't think they're going to go to Jacksonville next week and win. I think the division comes down to Sunday, and if the Jaguars win, I think they're in. If the Colts lose, obviously I think they're out as well. But even if the Colts win, I don't think they're going to be able to win the division and get the Jaguars to slip up. But it's going to be interesting, George, because after the game Sunday, Trevor Lawrence entered the concussion protocol. And right now we'll see about his status for Sunday. If he can't play, CJ Beathard will start. That's also huge right now in terms of helping the Bucs win that game. We'll see. I mean, the concussion, that's obviously one that's impossible to predict. So he could miss 1 game. He can miss no games. He can miss the rest of the season in theory about, depending on how he reacts and how he's feeling. But the right now, I would say out of 100, I give the Colts like a 40% chance of winning the division, which is, probably 35% higher than I ever thought it'd be at any point this season.
I agree with everything you just said. Man, I think this week's tremendously important, both from the Jacksonville standpoint and the Houston standpoint. I mean, the Texans are playing the Browns in a game that is important for the Colts on both sides.
Right.
Either one of those teams losing helps the Colts, in this giant, crazy playoff chase. So I think that's one that, Colts fans should have an eye on. But the game down in Tampa, the Bucs need it. There's no question. They're tied right now with the Saints in the first in that division. They absolutely have to get this win. They're trying to get in the playoffs themselves. They're trying to save Todd Bowles' job. I think that game is going to be very interesting to keep an eye on. And like I said, the quarterback situation, both in Jacksonville and Houston, who knows what's going to happen? You got 2 guys still in the concussion protocol. CJ Stroud for a second week in the protocol could be cleared. There's no word really out of Houston one way or another. There's no way to know. The only thing I saw was a report yesterday that said he's still having symptoms, which is obviously not great.
No.
After a week, that's, you never want to hear that. You never want to see that. But you have no idea. By tomorrow, that could no longer be true, and he could be ready to go. And you really hope that is the case, because you hate to see any quarterback, any player go through something like this, first of all, but especially a rookie who's playing as well as he is. It's just better for the league to have him out there. Same is true of Trevor Lawrence. You don't want, there's enough star quarterbacks not playing right now. You don't need more of that. But you just don't, concussions there's no time frame, and it doesn't matter. It's one to the next, makes no difference. You can't say, well, Lawrence, his was after the game, so that's not as bad as, say, Michael Pittman's, where everybody saw it and everybody knew immediately what had happened. It doesn't matter. There's no, it's, every person's going to react differently. Every concussion is going to react differently. There's no way of knowing when these guys will come back. And I think that, but it adds another element to this already unpredictable playoff situation. Colts are in a 3-way tie for the division lead and a 4-way tie in the wild card. I don't know about you, I can't remember any time in NFL history anything quite like this.
I agree. It's been, if it's happened, it's been a very long time, and it's, like I said, not at least as memorable as I can, think, at least in recent time, without a doubt. And it's fun. This is great. Obviously, it's been a lot of fun. But you're right. Even Trevor Lawrence's status right now is going to throw a big wrench into this race for both the wild card and the division. I'll just think really fast here. What are you rooting for if you're the Colts right now in terms of Browns Texans? Because if you look at it, right, the Browns win, that eliminates the Texans most likely from the division race. But also if the Texans win, right, the Colts right now have the tiebreaker, and obviously they play week 18. George, I think I'm honestly rooting for the Texans to win this game, because you look at the Browns schedule, right? The Colts are right now 1 game behind. They're 9-5. The Colts are 8-6. So you need the Browns to lose 2 games, right, in order for the Colts to jump them. And it's like, you look at their schedule, Browns have obviously the Texans this week, one last home game on a short week against the Jets, and then they finish up on the road at the Bengals. That's one where if the Browns, we're talking about a 1-2 finish here, if the Texans can pull off a win at home with CJ Stroud or not, that could be one where if the Colts don't win the division, we could be talking about them climbing up maybe to the 5 seed here, and maybe going to Jacksonville and playing the Jaguars after all in the playoffs. I think, honestly, this week, I think it's better for the Colts right now if the Texans win and bring the Browns down into the pack.
I would agree. I think that's just because you've got the game with Houston, in your back pocket. You can settle that one on the field in week 18, and Cleveland's got that tiebreaker over you. So you want to, like you said, you need them to lose 2 out of 3 to have any chance to jump them. So I think it's better for Houston to win. One thing that you said there that makes me wonder, any chance you start a quarterback for the Jets in that game in the middle there?
I do have a few throws left in the right arm. I might, although I will say, behind that offensive line, I might pull a Zach Wilson and say, I don't think I want to play. That 1 day game check, not worth it. Not worth it.
I would say no.
That Dolphins game, George, I thought they had like a bounty on Zach Wilson's head. They were trying to kill him.
Like Mississippi, didn't it? Like there was no line, and you're just counting, and then you go. It was rough, to say the least, and that's what makes this so interesting again. You got teams like the Jets and the Panthers, next week that are going to affect this AFC playoff race, and you have no idea how those games are going to go and how they're responding. This weekend, though, I just, to what you said a little while ago, this week feels like such a huge, tremendously big week because of some of those games, specifically in the division, that are just going to, outside of it, you got Pittsburgh and Cincinnati too. Pittsburgh could be officially eliminated, but they did beat the Bengals the last time they played. So
that's right.
Who knows if they get a win, then, that's another thing that could muddy this water. Buffalo seems like the hottest team in this group. They certainly beat the best competition to get back into this. We'll see how they play out the rest of the way, but that to me is the craziest thing about this. Buffalo probably is the hottest team going right now. They need help at this point, though, to get it. Now, Granted, their situation is not as dire as it might seem, because if they win out, either the Colts or Texans going to lose in week 18. Buffalo should hop up in there. But it's going to be, it's going to be tough for them. And I think there are versions where they win out. If they win out, Cincinnati wins out, either the Colts or Texans win out, Buffalo's not in the playoffs. And that's how weird this whole thing is right now.
And that's why, George, we kept on harping for the last, like, it feels like now 6 weeks, like, about tiebreakers, why some of these games are so important, because you're right. The Bills are the hottest team, and there's a 1,000,000% chance here, depending, like I said, how things shake out here. But if the Browns win out, or at least when they're 9-5, they win 2 games, you're 11-6, you're in. And like you said, the Bengals have a tiebreaker over the Bills. Bengals went out, they're in. Colts went out, they have the tiebreaker over the Bills, they're in. So it's like, you're 100% right. The Bills could win out here, beat the Dolphins in week 18 on the road, be 10-7, and be out of the playoffs. And easily, that'd be a 5-game winning streak, I think it is, to end the season. Yep. And they'd be at home.
And look at that. Like, where's Buffalo now? 9th, I think, in the if you go just pure standings. I think they're 9th right now.
They are 9th, yes, sir. 8-6.
They could finish anywhere from winning the division still, because if the Dolphins drop one of these next 2 and they win out and beat Miami in week 18, they're the AFC East champions, to not being in the playoffs at all. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about how volatile this race is. They're the hottest team, as we just mentioned, and their range of possible results is everywhere from like the 4th seed, I think, maybe even 3rd seed, because they've got a tiebreaker over Kansas City. So depending on what happens, there, anywhere from like the 3rd seed to sitting at home watching the playoffs on the couch. And that's even if you win out, because I think if the Dolphins win the first 2, then that week 18 game doesn't matter. It's just that insane of a playoff race where, and you can do that with every one of these teams. Houston, you could win the division, could stay home. The Colts could win the division, could stay home. I don't think the Bengals could still win the division, but they could move up to the 5 seed or be out completely. Cleveland can still technically win the division or stay home. They probably have the least range in there, because they pretty much have to lose out at this point to be the one staying home. But it's still mathematically possible, and that's, to me, that's insane. And I think all 4 division champs still have some shot of being the number 1 overall seed, although Jacksonville really, really hurt their chances and may be mathematically eliminated from that race.
Yeah, I'm assuming so, since they're 8-6, the Ravens are 11-3, and obviously the Ravens just beat them, so I think they're done. But you're right.
They would be out.
Chiefs still have a path. Dolphins still have a path. And like I said, too, like it goes back to, like, we are repeating ourselves, but we're repeating ourselves because it's true, and we're seeing it play out right in front of our eyes. It's why we talk about taking care of business and why some games mean more than others. One of the biggest things now that's working in the Colts' benefit is not only they are hot at the end of the year, but it's also the fact they look at their conference record. They right now are 6-4, and outside of the Browns, who are 6-3, so have a little bit better win percentage, the Colts right now have the 2nd best conference record of any team in the wild card chase. And that's a big reason why at 8-6, and with everything muddled together, why they have continued to hold on to a playoff spot, and why other teams like the Texans, other teams like the Bills, I know they just lost on Saturday. They took away some momentum, but even a team like the Broncos, who were red hot going into Saturday's game against the Lions, like that conference record is a big reason why the Colts are still above a lot of these other teams that are hot, because they took care of business and they have won a lot of their conference games, which is massive now. And you see, like, we talk about a lot of the NFL, right? It's such a short season, so every game actually means something. And you're seeing that now for the Bills, where it's like you go back to like that 12 men on the field against the Broncos on that Monday Night Football game, where the Broncos got a redo on the miss kicked at the end of the game that gave them a win, and the Bills lost the game by their own volition, their own stupidity. Like, that could, despite that happening probably 6 weeks from the end of the season, almost 2 months ago now, by the time the end of the regular season does come, that could be the difference between the Bills in the playoffs and being maybe a popular Super Bowl pick, and them out of the playoffs, despite being one of the hottest teams in the league post-Thanksgiving. And it does come down to one game. And you hope, again, the Colts, it's not going to, that one game for them is not going to come back to bite them, being the Browns game. But to their credit so far, they are winning a lot of these big games to where they are not allowing one bad game early in the year, midway through the year, to dictate now at the end of the season where they are playing, if they're home in the playoffs, if they're home on the couch, or if they're right now going on the road and still keeping their season alive come mid-January. They're doing a good job of late of taking care of their own business. And that's why, again, like now, I know it's a non-division game or non-conference game, I should say, against the Falcons. Massive, massive. I mean, clearly, obviously, we don't have to say that. But now every single game, even though last week was a playoff game, every single game from this point on, George, because of the little help the Colts got for the most part, at least in terms of the wild card standings, where right now they are still holding that 7th spot. Every game is a playoff game from here on out, even if it is a non-conference opponent like Atlanta for the final away game here in 2023.
It's looking at remaining schedules and possible agents of chaos here. What about the Dolphins? They've got Dallas next week, Baltimore the week after that, a game that could potentially determine the number 1 seed, and then
Bills.
the Bills at the end of the year in a game that could determine the AFC East champ. So the Dolphins could lose all 3 of those games and then drop into this wild card camp. I can never remember the AFC being this volatile. Normally, at this point in the season, there's maybe 2 teams with a shot at the top spot. There's maybe 3 or 4 teams still down in the playoff race, but it's not. It feels like all 7 spots are still up for grabs right now in terms of who could take that seed. And you've got teams like the Raiders out there who the Colts will see next week, who could throw a wrench into this with a couple different games that they've got. I think it's exciting. I really do. I mean, I think you've got 3 weeks left, and it feels like the range of possibilities is anything can happen. Again, like you said, it comes back to winning the games that really matter. For the Colts at this point, that's all 3 of them. I don't think there's any. You lose once, you run the risk of not making the playoffs. You lose twice, you're out. There's no question about that. You win all 3, you may win the division for the first time since 2014. The stakes could not be higher. The race could not be tighter. And for the Colts, the schedule is inviting. Now, look, that is on paper. And we'll see. If they come out with a performance like they had against Cincinnati, any one of these 3 teams could beat them. But if they come out like they did, especially after the start of the first quarter against Pittsburgh, they can beat all 3 of these teams. So I think that's what makes it so interesting. There's nobody. Who would you put your money on right now? If you had to pick a Super Bowl right now, today, who's your AFC champ? Who's your NFC champ?
To me, NFC is easy. 49ers. I think they're just in the NFL in general. Forget conference. I think they're on a level on their own. I would be shocked. Let me ask you this really fast here. I know it's a totally different segue. How I would compare it to like the 2007 Patriots that were 18-0 and lost to the Giants in the Super Bowl. That kind of level of surprise if the 49ers don't win it.
They are clearly the top team. I don't think there's any question about that. Philadelphia keeps making that more and more clear every week. And when you look at the 2 other top contenders in the NFC are what? Dallas and Philly. And Dallas got pantsed in Buffalo on Sunday. And then last night, there's no way the Eagles can lose that game with everything that's on the line to a backup quarterback. And yet they did on a last-minute drive. So, yeah, I think San Francisco is clearly the favorite in the NFC, and I would have to say I'd be stunned if they didn't win the Super Bowl. But the AFC, I don't think the Jets will win it. I'll give you that.
I would say right now I'd go with the Chiefs still. I just trust them. They have that championship. They've been there. Even if they have to go on the road, like the Ravens, I'll be honest, I just don't trust them. I don't trust the defense. I don't trust the receivers in the passing game. Like Lamar's been great. But now, again, if you got to play a big-time playoff game, which, by the way, Lamar's not played well in the postseason in his career. And he's not been there in a few years because he's been injured, but he has not been a very good postseason player early on in his career. No Mark Andrews. I just don't trust that receiving core. I mean, even on Sunday night, you see him against the Jaguars. They moved the ball between the 20s, no problem, stalled a lot in the red zone, and got breaks just with how bad, the Jaguars and their own problems they have on offense as to why Jacksonville couldn't score more. I mean, how many times are you going to go in the red zone and score no points and just shoot yourself in the foot? The receiver concerns are troubling for me and real for Kansas City. With that said, I'll trust their defense. I will take the Chiefs to go out of the AFC, George. What are you going with?
I have no clue because it's such a crazy thing, but I think the most fun would be if either Cleveland or Buffalo is the one that wins it, just because of the history of those two, the struggles that they've had, and it's both like possible. So I just think that would be the most interesting outcome. But I think I probably would lean towards the Chiefs for the same reasons that you do. The experience factor, I think, is huge here. There's still a chance that the road's going to go through Arrowhead, which we've seen is really difficult in January and February. They've got their own flaws too. I think that's what makes it so interesting in the AFC. Every one of these teams has some massive flaw that could cost them a playoff game at some point. So, which one of them's going to avoid that? I trust Mahomes and Reed the most, but you just never know. I mean, Kadarius Toney could end the whole season. It's going to be he's cost him 2 games, right? I mean, the Lions game in the opener, and then obviously the Bills game a couple weeks ago. He could do that again in the postseason. That's not a wild prediction. That's what to me is so tough though. How do you look at any of these teams and say, okay, that one, the most complete team is probably Cleveland, because they've gone through 4 quarterbacks. Their offensive line changes every week, and yet they're 9-5 and still sitting here a pretty good chance to make the. But who knows? Are they going to have a 5th quarterback start in the postseason? It's hard to pick them. Buffalo, as we just mentioned, is the hottest team. It might not even get in. Colts have a backup quarterback. Houston's got a rookie quarterback. Every stretch, every team you look at here, Jacksonville's going the wrong direction. It's almost impossible to pick. That's why I think Kansas City probably, if you have to put money down, is probably the safest bet. But all 9 teams still like in serious playoff contention could get there.
And that's why too, if you're the Colts, like just getting in, again, you take it 1 week at a time. But it's like there's no matchup right now. There, out of all the possible combinations in the playoffs, there's no team, George, that I go into the a playoff game with saying they have no chance to win. And like that's like I think partly of why it's so exciting right now and why like there's like the Colts make the playoffs. This would again not only just be a massive surprise, but it's not like it's just like, oh, great to be here, and then you get slaughtered by the Ravens in the wild card weekend, and okay, the season was fun, like we made it, but you didn't have a chance. I mean, the Colts are nowhere near the top. Like, if we had to do a draft of Super Bowl representation from the AFC, like the Colts are going to be one of the last teams we pick. But with that said, like there's no team right now I say, oh boy, they have no chance if they play in the first round or in the second round. Like you said, every team has a flaw. Every team, the Colts have a chance to go into the game saying, oh, we can. I mean, they already went into Baltimore and won. The Chiefs right now, I mean, Travis Kelce has aged, feels like 10 years in the span of one off season. And Kadarius Toney, I think he's playing the wrong sport, George. That's a guy who I think if he was a setter on a volleyball team, he'd be elite. He puts the ball in the perfect spot every week for a DB to pick it off. I think he's just a case, of mistaken identity where if he's just if he's playing volleyball, he's a star. He's a star, but that's, again, you look at anytime they're throwing the ball now, he's given a DB a tremendous opportunity to pick it off. Dolphins right now, speed is very concerning, but it's also like if you can the Colts do what they did against the Steelers, pound the ball down their throat and win power football. I mean, the Titans we saw kind of do that. So it's not impossible to go down to Miami and win that game. Like you look around, Jacksonville, I mean, that might be the one just because the Colts woes in Jacksonville.
The free space on the board. We know that.
Oh, but you mentioned this, I think it was off the pod last week, and I think you're right. So I think it's worth bringing up here. It would be classic Colts to have their Jacksonville streak ended by Gardner Minshew in the playoffs in Jacksonville. It's a fitting end to the streak.
It would be. It's been the weirdest streak anyway. It makes no sense. I mean, the last couple of years, sure. Last year the Colts were horrendous, and this year the Jags are pretty good. But when you look at the entirety of this streak, the one win Jacksonville team, their one win was against the Colts at home that year. There was one stretch, and they were like 3-20 something at home over the whatever, and like all 3 wins were against the Colts. It's just incredible this streak. So I think a streak like that, as crazy as it's been, the best way for it to end would actually be the Colts winning a playoff game there, because it makes no sense whatsoever. But that, I know, I think you're right. I think Miami is, if I'm being the handicapper, I think Miami is the worst matchup for this team, simply because, like you said, that team speed. I think the Colts would have a tough time getting to Tua. They'd have a tough time slowing down those receivers. But even as you mentioned, that's neutralized potentially by, running the ball with your third and fourth string running back and dominating, as the Colts have proven they can do somehow. I can't, that sentence is insane, but it's a fact.
That could be the X factor. Forget about Raheem Mostert and his outside zone runs and his, franchise record for touchdowns. The great equalizer, Tyler Goodson and Trey Sermon. That's going to keep Mike McDaniel up and Vic Fangio up all week long.
It is absolutely nuts that's something that's like not a joke. Like, I mean, it is sort of they're going to be scared, but they actually put on tape a dominant performance against a good defense in a game that mattered. That's the 2023 NFL season, though, I think, in a nutshell. I mean, you just look around the league, every week something happens that has no business happening. Every week, everybody but the 49ers causes you heart palpitations. It's just, what San Francisco just went and steamrolled Arizona like they're supposed to. And they're just going collective victories and steamrolling their way in. But even there, you wonder, injuries are the one thing. I mean, when they did lose this year, that had a lot to do with it. If McCaffrey goes out, if Purdy goes out, you don't know. I mean, you have no idea how this ultimately looks. And I think that's what makes this season so exciting. And honestly, it's not going to come as a surprise to anybody who's listened to the pod from the start this year, but there's no way that the Colts would be anywhere near this entertaining this late in the year. And to me, the fact that you've got 3 games that absolutely matter, that are dripping with potentially division title importance, you couldn't have asked for anything more.
No, you're 1,000,000% right, especially with what we went through last year. Could not ask for anything more here this season. You brought up injuries. I think it's important here because obviously that is now a big factor for the Colts. They won a tremendous game against the Steelers, but also paid the price for it. Michael Pittman Jr., I mean, thank God his head is still attached to the rest of his body with the way KZ came in there. Let's actually really talk about that really fast, George. The NFL suspended KZ right now for the rest of the season for that hit, not just for the diving at the head of Michael Pittman Jr., not even really trying to make a play on the ball, but also for repeated offenses. I think it's his 6th violation, I believe, of basically player safety issues that he's had. I have no problem with the rest of, the suspension for the rest of the year. I know there's been a lot of players on the Steelers side that are upset with it. Tom Brady has weighed in. He's very upset with it, blaming Gardner Minshew for putting the ball in harm's way and basically putting Michael Pittman Jr. in that position to get decleated, basically. Do you have any problem with the suspension, George, in terms of the law coming down hard on the Steelers DB for at least the next 3 games?
No, I don't, because the whole point of this rule is to change behavior. I mean, that's when all this started. My wife was at USA Football when the concussion crisis initially started. So I've been, living this for a while. The whole point of every one of these targeting rules is to change player behavior. And obviously the fines aren't working with KZ. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. And I saw his agent, because it's agent's job to fight on his behalf. I saw him out there saying, they're going to appeal, and a lot of those fines were rescinded. So, he doesn't think that it should be a repeat offender. But if you got fined, it means you got flagged during the game. And if you got flagged during the game, it means you at least put yourself in a position that looked to the official like you were targeting. So I don't have any problem with the suspension at all. I think obviously the fines are not changing behavior, and that's the whole point here. Julian Blackman put it in the best terms. First of all, Tom Brady is right to a point. I don't argue his point on Minshew in the sense that throw was part of this. There's no question about it. It was a hospital throw. It happens. Every quarterback makes them from time to time. I think somebody put together a clip of Brady doing it and put it out there on Twitter. There are a lot. Is one of the dangers for both quarterback and a wide receiver. So I do think Gardner after the game, by the way, took his share of the blame for it and said, that, he had put him in harm's way a little bit there, and he regretted it. So that part of it, I don't argue, but I think all these people that want to, oh, well, what's he supposed to do? Including Mike Mitchell, the Colts' own safeties coach, by the way, who had weighed in that, it's too hard to play safety and everything. I just thought Julian Blackmon, he was talking after the game and he said, yeah, it's a football thing, but it's a life thing. That Michael Pittman has 2 young kids. He's got a wife at home that he's got to support. And Blackman's point is, you got to get these plays out of the game because they threaten, yes, your career, but they threaten your ability to have a family and support that family. And I think we got to remember that. I see so many takes of like, oh, football's soft. And first of all, I can't get up my stairs without my knee aching these days. I'm not calling anybody soft, okay? Second of all, if your entire entertainment in football hinges on head injuries, then I don't know, go watch horror movies or something. That this is not the right thing for you. If that, honestly, your enjoyment of football is gone because you're not allowed to target somebody's head, I have no sympathy for you. I just don't. But I do think at times we got to remember, it's so easy to dehumanize these guys because fantasy football, just the game itself. I mean, any sport, it happens. I mean, basketball players aren't human either, right? They're just there to entertain us and score points. It's easy to do because it is entertainment and it has a lot to do with it. But it just stuck home standing, right in front of Julian Blackmon when he's talking about that. You realize there's a risk all these guys take and they understand it. They sign up for it. But when you lower your head and you, like you said, don't make a play on the ball, don't make any attempt to make an actual defensive play, you're putting more than a football game at risk. And I think that's why I support this suspension. It's why I support the rules that are in place. It's not going to be perfect. There's always going to be calls that you're like, really, no, this was not borderline. This was an easy one. I think the suspension was an easy one. Yeah, I don't get the opposition.
I'm with you in the sense that, and I've shared plenty of frustration like most fans do, when you see a borderline roughing the passer call where the guy breathes on and the quarterback falls down and there's a flag, or you run by and like his hand like grazes the helmet and it's like contact to the head or neck area and it's a flag. And we've all been cursing at the TV and calling the game soft and calling the game rigged as well, whatever you want to use. That frustration for those calls to me is nowhere near the same as the frustration or the scariness, if you will, like I said, of watching Pittman take that hit where he dives and is exposed. I get if you're a DB, again, you want to prevent the catch. That's one where you look at it, just to me, it feels like automatic. Like some things just pass the eye test. Where you look at it, it's almost like the definition of pornography, right? Where they say like you know when you see it. That was one of those hits, George, where it feels like you saw it. It's like, okay, that like you see the suspension coming down, it makes sense. You see it right away. You think now, oh well, he's done for the game, and I think rightfully so, done for the season. Like I said, because it's not his first offense. And you're trying to eliminate those plays out of the game. That's one where I'm with you. I don't really see the opposition. I think it's also easy for Tom Brady to say that now, number one, as a retired player, number two, as a quarterback, and number three, as someone who has benefited from a lot of rule changes. I think it's easy for him to say that now, this is on Gardner Minshew. This should not be a flag, or this should not be a suspension, I should say. Let's, put more onus on the quarterbacks to keep their players safe. It's not like Tom Brady did a great job of that either. I think Wes Welker have a word or two about that. So it's just like, it's a situation where just, to me, it feels like you watch it, you see it, it feels obvious. I'm with you. I don't really see a defense on the other side, or would call the NFL soft for suspending DeMonte KZ the rest of the year, which is again 3 games. But I don't think this is like an issue or over the top whatsoever.
No, I'm with you. And I'll tell you, just from a personal standpoint, I was in the press box, was it 8, 9 years ago now? I don't know, probably longer than that. 14 years ago, 15 years ago, when Austin Collie, he had the concussion against the Eagles. He came back. They're playing the Jaguars at home, and it happened again. And he's laying there motionless on the field. And that, my mind went there immediately on the Pittman play. That's where my head went first. And obviously, we know that shortened Collie's career. There's no question about that. And that was one of the scariest things I saw on a football field, the Austin Collie play. And until Pittman got up and walked off, my mind was in the same spot Sunday. Just to put it into context.
Very scary. I was honestly kind of surprised he got up and like looked as into it as he was. Like that's a credit to him, for sure. But that was very, very scary without a doubt. And like I said, I think to prevent, like if you're the NFL, to prevent more of those hits from happening is obviously the right thing to do here. It's not like you don't want that in the game. And that's to me, like at the end of the day, that's what the suspension is about here. And again, we're in agreement. It's obvious. It's egregious, that hit. And I think the NFL right now coming down hard is absolutely the right thing to do. But now also too, like the Colts are able to weather the storm there, right? And win the game despite Michael Pittman Jr. missing most of it. And now you look ahead. Who we talked about Trevor Lawrence. Who the hell knows the concussions? I'm going to assume, George, that Michael Pittman Jr. is not going to play on Sunday. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong. I'm going to assume it. And if you're the coach, like you got to also assume yourself here, you're not going to have the services of MPJ on Sunday. Right now, the statuses of Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor, both up in the air. According to Adam Schefter, it seems like Zach Moss is going to try to give it a go. The x-rays on his shoulder came back negative, and the reports are that at least he had trouble gripping the football, and that's the reason why he couldn't come back into the game on Saturday. And for Jonathan Taylor, according to at least Ian Rappaport on Saturday morning, it seems like there's a realistic chance that JT could return here on Sunday, and that's a big reason why the Colts didn't put him on IR, because they maybe internally were circling this Week 16 game against the Falcons all along for his return here, George. Look, it's the Falcons. They just lost to the Panthers. You obviously can't overlook them, but this is a game where if you have no Michael Pittman Jr., I think you bare minimum need one of the two of Jonathan Taylor or Zach Moss to be on the field Sunday here to give yourself a good chance to win. And obviously, hopefully you get both back, but I think you definitely need at least one back here on Sunday to go into this game.
Yeah, there's no question that the problem with Moss was grip. I mean, he told us that after the game, kind of informally at his locker, that he was fighting to get back in and he just couldn't grip the ball. And obviously that was a concern for both him and the Colts. So putting him back in the game,
I would say so.
So we'll see, how that goes. I don't know. It sounds, again, we're speculating and I don't have a medical degree, but it sounds like a nerve thing, whether it's stinger, whatever it may be. And we know from history in a lot of different areas with that, it's as unpredictable as concussion. It comes back when it comes back. So he could be fine right now, or it could be 3 weeks from now. You just don't know how that's going to play out. So we'll see. That's definitely something to watch during the week. The Taylor issue is very interesting. I mean, initially I think the Colts had 2 to 3 weeks. Then it came out it's 3 to 5. The Colts never said anything. The initial reports were that it was 2 to 3 weeks, and then it came out, no, it's more 3 to 5. I think after the surgery, this is week 3, I believe, for him. So, it's in whichever time frame you want to go with. It's either the beginning or the end of that time frame. Certainly do think that's why the Colts didn't put him on IR, because there was a chance. And I'm sure it's going to come down to the same thing with him. Is the thumb strong enough to grip the ball? Can you control it? Can you hold on to it? But I do agree, not knowing, what Pittman's status is, the run game you would think is going to be the primary element here. And trying to get the offensive line to repeat the performance it had against Pittsburgh, moving people, really just resetting that line wherever they wanted it to be. And opening up those, I saw some crazy stats, something like 4.2 yards before contact on average for the running backs on Sunday. At least Goodson and
Sermon,
that's incredible. I mean, that tells you how good that line. And I go back to Tony Sparano as MVP, but the Pittman thing in particular, who knows? I know this about him. He is as tough as they come. He is a throwback player in every way. His dad was a running back. His dad was that way. We have seen him do things, just getting up and walking off the field was pretty remarkable. We've seen him do things that a very small number of NFL players will do. So could he play? But concussions aren't a toughness thing. You can't rub dirt on this. You can't shake this off. It's not. You can't rush it. There's really nothing you can do to make it happen faster than nature intends. So we'll see. I will say this in regard to all these injuries. I don't know how much stock to put into Wednesday's injury report when it comes out. It will obviously be there, but they're going to do a walkthrough again. So if you're going to give any of these guys an extra day, that would be the day you would think you would give them. So I wouldn't really read much into it until Thursday. And we know all we're going to get from Shane is we'll see. I can give you that quote right now. So you're going to have to watch that report and see how it plays out. I would not pay a great deal of attention until Thursday.
That's a really good point, because going back to JT and Zach Moss specifically, like when you look at their injuries where they're both having to basically do and send around securing the football, that's injuries, George, where I don't think you can rush them back either. And I think to your point of paying attention to Thursdays and Fridays practices, that's going to be one where you're going to, I'm sure, test grip strength for both to see how they fare. Because if you can't grip the ball, like this Falcons team is not very good. One of the ways you allow them in the game is by fumbling the football. And if Zach Moss fully 100% can have, grip strength back, or JT is still working, not comfortable with the thumb, but he's going to try to push through it, and you can't hold on the football, George, like you're screwed. And so that's injury is kind of like, or two injuries where we just said before, we want him back. I think you need one of the two back on Sunday at least. But that's also one where if you're the Colts and you're seeing how practice goes and JT's maybe not progressing the way you like and Zach Moss still feeling lingering effects, I don't think you can, like, if they're 75% even, I'm not sure if you can push it just because they're injuries. And if they're not fully or close to 100%, that's going to lead, I think you could argue, directly to a fumble more than a knee injury or an ankle injury, just because if your grip strength isn't totally there, the Falcons defensive players are going to be ripping out the football. They have a good defense, Atlanta does. That's one of the areas they're going to try to, focus on, I'm sure. The Colts may not have a choice but to go back to this Sermon-Goodson dynamic duo now. If both players aren't progressing, let's say, drastically between how they were last week and how they are going to this week, because that's, like I said, that's directly impacting ball security, which directly impacts your ability to win or lose.
Hometown game for Goodson too, so he'll be fired up. A lot of family.
Oh, yeah.
There's already more ticket requests than he can fulfill for that one. So if he is out there, I'm sure he's going to be super fired up. We'll get into this more on Thursday, but I do look at this in a lot of ways as a similar matchup to Pittsburgh. The Falcons have not been playing well lately. The offense is obviously the biggest area of concern, but there are pieces on that offense that should be working better. Much like we were talking about with Pittsburgh, you look at Deontay Johnson, you look at George Pickens, you look at Najee Harris, you would think that they would be able to produce more than they have. In Atlanta, you've got Drake London, you've got Kyle Pitts, and you've got Bijan Robinson. Now, Arthur Smith needs to be reminded you've got two of those guys on a weekly basis, but there's talent there. So I think you've got to be, like you said, you've got to be aware of this one. Yes, they're coming off a terrible loss. And yes, their season's heading in the wrong direction right now. But that defense is solid, much like Pittsburgh's defense is solid. And there are guys on that offense that will hurt you if you're not prepared.
I watched way more of that Falcons-Panthers game than I'm proud to admit.
Than anyone in Charlotte did, it sounds like.
That is for sure. You were not kidding about the 16.16 fans. That was spot on. That's a tremendous line by you. Just to go back to that, I give you credit there. But it's like it was a rain-soaked afternoon in Charlotte. They had 51 plays ran, the Falcons did. Do you know how many times Bijan Robinson touched the ball, George? You're going to take a guess. Pouring rain, 51 plays.
7.
7 carries, 1 catch, 8 times.
Jeez.
He touched the ball 8 times. And again, in a monsoon when Arthur Smith has no trust for Desmond Ridder. I hope he doesn't wake up, and I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast he hasn't clearly, because all year long, Falcons fans are clamoring him to get the ball in skilled players' hands, and he's refused to do it. So they got a lot of Ferraris right on that offense, but thankfully he doesn't want to drive them. Arthur Smith does, at least. He still prefers the minivan for whatever reason. Taylor Heineke now is going to, looks like, be the quarterback for the Falcons. So I hope that doesn't give him a spark, but I don't get it. And we'll again talk about it more on Thursday as we preview that game. But There's a lot of big weapons on that Falcons offense. Arthur Smith, for whatever reason, hates using them. Hopefully, George, that continues one more week. Like, if we're talking about a game on Sunday afternoon, we're doing the post-game pod, and it's Bijan Robinson, 8 touches again, sign me up. I'll take that right now.
Yeah, I'm sure the Colts defense will too. They'll be all about that. Don't use him. Don't put Kyle Pitts in the game. Don't don't do any of those things. It'll be interesting. I think Atlanta is a team. In some ways, it's underachieved this year. When you look at what the potential is there for them to do, and obviously that defense can make plays. I think I saw 3 of the last 4 games they haven't allowed a touchdown. So obviously they can get it done on that side of the ball. Colts have got to be ready for this one. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. But I do think the Colts are not in a position to look past anyone, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. I think you've seen with Shane Steichen that they understand. They understand the 1 week at a time mentality. And that's probably the most important thing. It's cliche, but it's probably the most important thing they can take into this, because there's a 3-way tie for the division and a 4-way tie for the wild card. There's no sense in trying to play out these playoff scenarios. They all change the minute one game you don't expect goes the way you don't expect it to go. And so really, Zaire Franklin said it after the game Saturday. The only thing they can do right now, focus on their own locker room. Get ready, get prepared, go to Atlanta and have the best possible effort you can give. That's it. Nothing else they can affect. They can't win 3 games this week. They can't win the division this week. They can't clinch a playoff spot this week, but they can beat the Atlanta Falcons. And I think that's where their mindset is. And it's where it's got to be.
And that's why I keep going back, and hopefully don't eat these words if we're sitting here in week 18 talking about that Bengals loss is the biggest reason why the Colts were out of the playoffs. But it goes back to, George, why I do think that loss could be still more of a benefit than anything else, because it serves as a wake-up call where, again, you go back to 2021, for example, when the team just ran out of gas at the end of the year. This is shaping up kind of to be eerily similar to that, just when you look at the schedule. Like, the Colts had, what was it, a 96% playoff odds to going into that week 17 game against the Raiders. And obviously you lose the last 2 and you're out of the playoffs. And not that the Colts don't have anywhere near that high of a chance right now, but it's like your schedule, you have 3 easy games on paper on your schedule. So it feels like right now the Colts are destined to make the playoffs in some capacity, with the division still being up for grabs. And it's like you go 2 years ago, you run out of gas. Again, there's a lot of reasons for that as well. But I think now you look back, like the Colts have obviously had to dig out of a 3-5 hole. And so you spend so much energy chasing right now early season losses that we've seen for plenty of teams, not just the Colts, plenty of teams. You run out of gas at the end because you're busy mounting a comeback that you just drain yourself. I think that serves as good wake-up call reset if you're the Colts 2 weeks ago, of just like I said, you're not going to overlook any opponent because you saw what happened. You got punched in that. Like, it wasn't just a loss to a hungry Bengals team that did not look anywhere near as playoff caliber then 2 weeks ago as they do now. But like, they got just dominated, where it's like you are not even on the same field, you're not on the same level. That sort of cold water to the face when you're not expecting it, I think, like I said, just puts these next 3 games in the reset frame of just like, you're not overlooking the opponent. You're going to take them all seriously. And I think it almost gives them an extra jolt of energy just because of how quickly you were humbled, that I think it's going to serve more beneficially positive, George, than it will negative. Again, assuming, and hopefully not, I'm not eating these words here in 2 weeks, and that loss is the reason why they're out.
Yeah, we'll see. It's certainly, at the time, we talked about it in the postgame pod when it happened. It was a massive hit to this team and their playoff chances. They responded in the right way against Pittsburgh, came out, dominated that game, got right back into the playoff picture. Now you've got to have 3 Pittsburgh games to end the year. And I think they understand that. You've got to come back out with that same mindset, that same intensity, maybe a little more special teams execution, and walk away with 3 victories. But I think they really do understand, because their season's been so crazy and they face adversity from literally the first day of training camp, that there's no sense in getting into all these scenarios. And I think it's going to be fun for the media. It's going to be fun for the fans to sit there, and I'm sure the playoff machines right now are really fun to rev up and go through the possibilities. If this happens, if that happens, and see how it all shakes out. I think the Colts have that right mindset because of the Cincinnati game. Of the only thing that matters is going down to Atlanta on Christmas Eve and winning the football game. Anything else is out of their control, and anything else doesn't help them right now. They can't go and beat Cleveland for Houston. They can't go and beat Jacksonville for Tampa Bay. All they can do is take care of their own business, and I really think the Bengals game underscores that for them in every meaningful way. And we talked back then about this being a young roster, and a lot of these guys not having been here before. I think that loss aged them a little bit. I think it showed a lot of those guys, this is the level you've got to be at now. This is the importance of these remaining games.
And going back to Saturday, I think you're 100% right. After that first quarter, you really saw this team just take it to another level, to refocus, not get phased by the moment. Like I said, I think they still win that game if the Bengals game didn't happen, let's say, and they, let's just say, won that game in Cincinnati. But like I said, I 100% think like you matured overnight and grew up a little bit just in that 3-hour span of getting your tail whooped. That I think definitely carried into Pittsburgh, and I think was a big reason why they definitely were able to win that game. Last thing here, George, before we do get out of here. We were rooting, obviously, for the Titans to beat the Texans. Helps the Colts playoff odds, both for the division and for the wild card. But I will say, seeing how that game ended, where Houston drives down, scores a touchdown, like 4 minutes left to get the game to overtime, win in overtime, it felt like karma. It did feel like karma because if you're the Titans, they wore the Oilers throwbacks right in the face of the Texans. You had Mike Vrabel with a 10-gallon hat on doing his best. Now I'm blanking. Who is it, George? Can you help me out
Bum
here,
Phillips.
please? Thank you. Bum Phillips. Holy cow. I was thinking of Buddy Ryan for a second. Wrong. Defensive-minded coach's dad there. That felt like you can't do that. They first of all, the Titans should not be allowed to have the Houston Oilers throwbacks in, like, there should be some sort of law that prevents them from having ownership of that. And you really cannot wear those when you're playing the Texans. Hurts the Colts, but karma definitely served the Titans right.
I'm gonna tell you one thing. They're on the wrong side of JJ Watt. That's not a guy I want to anchor. Right
True.
there, I would change my mind and hand over the jerseys. But no, that was. I'm a fan of pettiness, so I sort of just loved everything about that game because the Titans were incredibly petty, and then the Texans afterwards were very demonstrative, and the fact that they had won this game, and they play each other again next week, by the way, so that's going to be a pretty interesting, pretty fun situation. The roles might be reversed. The Texans might not have their rookie quarterback, or the Titans might not have their rookie quarterback, and the Texans might have theirs back, depending on how everything shakes out. But that game was entertaining for a lot of the wrong reasons. I do not understand why the Titans have Houston throwbacks. Although I will say, technically the Colts wore Baltimore throwbacks on Sunday. It was 56 uniforms or whatever they had. It's a little bit different situation because they had the same colors and they've had the same history, but it would be interesting if the Colts wore those uniforms someday when the Ravens come to Indianapolis. Baltimore already has such love for the Colts and the franchise, so I'm sure that would help matters tremendously.
But at least for the Colts perspective, at least they kept everything the same, right? Like kept the same name, kept the same uniform, same color scheme, like. And
Literally
the Titans,
kept the same uniform.
the
But
Titans,
the three stripes on the side. Technically the Colts wear Baltimore throwbacks every week, but
you're right about that. You're right. But at least, like, you see, like the Raiders, they've moved a million times, but everything stayed the same. The Rams have moved. Everything stayed the same. The Titans rebranded.
Yep.
They changed their name. They changed the uniforms. They changed the damn color scheme.
Yep. They changed everything about the franchise. It's very odd. And to do that against Houston, like I said, it's a level of petty I have to respect. To say, you know what, the Houston game is going to be the throwback where we wear those Oilers uniforms. I do wonder this, though, Ryan. If the Colts, like the Ravens, when they moved from Cleveland, City sued, and they were able to keep the rights. So the colors and the name, and that's why the Browns are still the Cleveland Browns, and the Ravens are now the Baltimore Ravens. If the same thing had happened, if Baltimore had sued back in the 80s, and the Colts could not be the Colts, what would the Indianapolis professional football team's name be right now in 2023?
I'm just gonna preface this with this on the spot, because I take names, I take uniforms way more seriously than I ever should. Like, I am someone who cares way more about how a team looks and what their name is. So this, I'm going to throw a name out there, but again, top of the head. So I'm not married to it. And I don't want to, have this come back to me here a few weeks from now and say, this is what idiot Ryan would have, is proposing. But off the top of my head, what fits Indy, if they were not able to keep the Colts, what about the Racers? And a little homage to the Indy 500. Again, I don't love it. Maybe too close to Pacers, Racers. Maybe, changing one letter in the name is too close. But that's initially what comes off the top.
I think you're heading to the right place. I mean, I think that's basketball and racing are sort of the hallmarks of this city. You're not going to name a football team after basketball. That's not going to happen. There was in Indianapolis Racers, Wayne Gretzky actually played for the Indianapolis Racers. It was a minor league hockey team here for a very short time. I'm trying to think about, around the rest of the city, like the baseball team's the Indians. It has been.
Can't do that.
I can remember that ain't gonna work.
Can't do that.
The hockey team, the old hockey team was the Ice, the Indianapolis Ice. But now the new hockey team is the Fuel, keeping with that racing theme. So they're the Indy Fuel. And then the soccer team is the Indy 11. So
you represent right now. That can't work.
The Indy 11, there are 11 guys, but I don't think that's gonna.
Can't steal a name.
Historic. I can't remember exactly what it is, but there is. I should know this. Like there is like a historic Indy 11 reason behind it. So it's got. I don't know. I think racing's where you go. If racers might be. It's hard to really come up with other ideas. I mean, Fuel is. Fuel feels very 90s, back when no one could have the S, the Miami Heat. And we're just going with
Utah Jazz.
Yeah, Utah Jazz. I don't know. It just has that feel to it. The branding.
How about the Indianapolis football team?
There you go.
The IFT.
That worked for a while out there. It's better than Commanders. I know that.
Yes, I would agree.
I don't know what vice presidents. There's a bunch of vice presidents that have come from Indiana.
The VPs, the Indianapolis VPs.
Yeah, I don't really. That one sounds like corporate though, doesn't it? Like at the end of the day, you're thinking like vice president of branding or marketing or something.
Maybe you sue the hell out of IU and take Hoosiers.
Yeah. So they showed the Purdue score on the video board during the game because Purdue obviously beat Arizona. Just you could see from the press box, you can see Gainbridge Fieldhouse. But they got a mixed response. It was pretty, and I think Hoosiers would get a mixed response as well for many.
That's a good point.
The same reasons. If they want to go on the petty level, if they want to go and take the Tennessee Maple Leafs, right? Mayflowers. That's what I mean. Mayflowers. Just the moving vans, the Indianapolis Mayflowers. Baltimore would love that.
They would love that. And yeah.
Or maybe just go Pilgrims or something. Just references Mayflowers.
What was it? The three boats that came over was the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. Was it the Mayflower one of them? Mayflower is someone. Was it,
the Pilgrims came over on the Mayflower.
There we go. What was the Nina? Oh, but this is really. I hate to say this.
North Columbus, the Nina.
Okay. Jeez. I mean, that shows you that the fourth grade education it's come and gone, George. It is well past my memory bank.
You don't need again. We always try to say that about math because we don't want to do it, but you really don't often need to come up with that one. That's the kind of useless information that's stuck in my head, though.
Yeah, thank you for having a young child that probably has learned that recently. That could jog your memory more than mine. But okay, so the Nina and the Pinta, the Santa Maria, they're out. That's totally unrelated. Mayflower, I like. The Pilgrims, I like. But I think the conclusion here, George, is no matter what we come up with, it's a good thing they are able to keep Colts because nothing right now tops what what the current name is. That's for sure.
There's no question, and it's one of those things where it's hard to even imagine. That it's sort of like I think part of the reason Commanders doesn't work is everybody knew that team by a different name for so long. it's really hard to come back and make it work. I remember Titans being sort of like that's where they're going. But now that's the Tennessee team. You just know them as the Titans,
Right.
you know, there's no other way around it. And Tennessee Oilers, they did that for a year when they were so Memphis. It doesn't, it just
This,
doesn't ring well
but
at
this is
all.
what I'll say. Like, I mean, are there Rams in Los Angeles? I don't think so. Are there Rams in St. Louis? Not that I'm aware of.
Could be Rams in the mountains in LA. They're definitely not Rams in St. Louis unless somebody's like got a pet.
I'm trying to think, like, are there Bears? There's no Bears in Chicago.
There better not be. That'd be a little bit frightening. I think a bear rampaging through downtown Chicago.
I mean, especially if they're trying to move to the country, that would be very scary. If you're moving into the woods area and you got bears just roaming the tailgate lots, that'd be very concerning.
I always thought the Bears were like a shot at the Cubs. You know, they're just saying
Interesting.
we're bigger, so we're the Bears. I don't know. They were the Staleys when they moved to Chicago, so that's definitely an upgrade.
I guess you could have gone, if you want to go the Cleveland Browns route, the Indianapolis Ursays, double I.
True.
I hate the alliteration.
Or, St. Louis has the Blues and the Indianapolis Blues. You could just, stick with the color one way or the other. Indianapolis Whites.
The baseball loves the colors. The Reds, White Sox, Red Sox, the Indianapolis Blues, Blue Sox, Blue Helmets.
Clearly a lot of creativity in the 1800s with team names, right? We're wearing Red Sox. All right, there you go. Boston Red Sox. Like,
there it is. Oh, you guys have White Sox, even though the Whites, George, this is okay. We'll make this very fast here. One thing that bothers you about your baseball team, you're named the White Sox. You don't wear white socks.
Nope.
Don't they wear black socks?
Most time.
Your name is the White Sox, and you don't wear white socks.
It's just on brand for the White Sox, though. They don't really do anything. We didn't even talk about the major trade between our two teams, by the way, last night. The random reliever and I think coming the other way. So obviously setting up that Mets White Sox World Series right there.
Sign us up. Blue Horse should pot off to maybe go and do a little World Series special. If it's a Sunday game, our alliances maybe, or our post-game pod may be elsewhere.
That's true. We'll be so caught up in our outstanding baseball teams. It was a wonderful season for both of us. Really,
yeah, memorable. Those two teams did a great job. They were actually very nice. They cleared the way to make sure our focus come training camp could be all on the Colts. We didn't have to have one eye on the standings or one eye on the game that night. They said, you know what, you guys are very busy. Do your jobs 100%. We'll just bow out of here in August and make sure you forget baseball the rest of the year.
Then White Sox getting a head start on it for next year too. So I give them credit for that. They're already eliminated from playoff contention for 2024.
They're making sure OTAs you're fully locked in minicamp.
Well, I need to be, right? Because Anthony Richardson will be back.
That's true. So you can't be competitive in June. You got to make sure and see how AR is throwing. You're right about that.
Yeah. Hey, it never ends here, right? We talk about that all the time. It never dull around this franchise. There's always something to talk about. There's always something to write about. This spring's going to be interesting. That's for sure.
Oh, it is. It is. And thankfully, George, I think got a fair way. At least we don't have any name. We have a lot of different controversies. No name controversy. Thank God. That's one where you can have the Commanders enjoy that one. Enjoy the, Tennessee Titans and Houston Texans fans. I almost call them the Oilers. Have them, you fight over those two.
Houston should sue to get the Oiler name back.
Agreed.
That should be their next big.
If they win next Sunday, they should automatically get that back. Like have the Texans or have the Titans wear the uniforms in Houston next week. And if you lose 2 games in a row in those uniforms, they should be forfeited. That should be, forget about standings. That should be like a uniform battle right there. Put them at midfield. Winner takes them home.
JJ Watt already said winning the last game, they should get the uniforms back. I'm with you. Put them on the line. Grudge match here.
I'm sure most fans would trade a win in the standings for just the uniforms.
Probably true.
Forget about that. Just give us the uniforms back.
In Houston, they might right now. I think that does really stick in their craw. And, I kind of get it. I don't know if there's any other teams that could really have that happen in the NFL. There's places around, we talked about before we came on the air, like some of the hockey teams that change their names and things, but I kind of get it. If you're going to go in and wear throwbacks against that team. I can see where it might anger the Houston fan base a bit.
Karma. Karma was definitely served to the Tennessee Tide. That is for sure. And I'm saying, I think it was a double win there for a lot of Texans fans. Not only beating the Titans, but also, like I said, beating them in their uniforms. I think there's a lot of excitement going on in Houston, without a doubt. George, a lot of excitement on this pod. Thursday preview pod. Get ready for Taylor Heinicke, which I'll be honest, I'm already nervous about. I wish it was Desmond Ridder. Taylor Heinicke in December, coming off the bench, scares me.
Taylor Heinicke had a good game last year at Lucas Oil Stadium. Of course, he did have an Indianapolis native at wide receiver who affected that game a bit as well. That he
did. So Taylor Heinicke, used to playing spoiler, we'll get you set for Colts Falcons matchup right here on Thursday's pod. Reminder, subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get, or not on YouTube, wherever you get your pods, because we're only in one spot on the Blue Horseshoe podcast. But wherever you do get your podcasts audio-wise, that is where you can find us, Blue Horseshoe Pod. Strong finish there, George, by me. So we'll end it before we screw anything else up here. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you Thursday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.